All right. So today we want to talk about governance. Governance being not only the third question on the lucid questions, but one element of society or the species even of vital importance, because that's what we use to coordinate decisions and action in between us. And that's what it fundamentally is about. If we act, our actions have some sort of an effect, positive, negative, neutral, whatever, but it definitely has some effect on the world. We change the world. And if that is not coordinated properly, then that has negative consequences. And so we should look into how governance happens and how we can use the different modes of governance to our advantage. So fundamentally, we can say that there's a kind of multipolar trap at work here, because very often being in the decision position within any system of governance gives you power, and that power is a benefit or an advantage in your survival strategy in the broadest, most fundamental sense. If you're in power, you usually have access to more resources, and access to more resources translate into more safety. That's why many people want to have that kind of power and strive towards those powerful positions. Now, it seems so that very scared people strive for that more. Scared people like sociopaths or psychopaths, right? They need to protect themselves more than other people do. And so they have this tendency to move up, and they compete for those positions. And so that locks them into this game. So that's really something that we need to be aware of in those governance situations. Generally, one can say that in societies with more centralized access to resource, also the decision power becomes more centralized, because it's much more easy to control the resource, right? So in you can see that in countries that have access to oil. Most of those countries are pretty much centrally organized. Most, not all, but most. If your resources are highly distributed, then it's much harder for small groups or single individuals to build up a power structure that enables them to put enough force on the people to do whatever they want. So if the more balanced the resource allocation, the more likely it is that you can have a way of governance that actually is connected with the people. Right? So that's a fundamental understanding. There's a really good 18-minute video on YouTube that goes through that in a very almost fun way. It's called Rules for Rulers. I'm going to link it in the notes for this conversation. So let's look at a couple of ways of governing and see if we can combine them into something that's actually useful or more useful than just the individual parts, because we can see these different forms of governing as tools, right? And just as we wouldn't cut a hair with a lawnmower, maybe some forms of governance are not good forms of governance for some purposes. Okay, let's start with hierarchical meritocracy or hierarchies in general. Right? In a hierarchy, there's somebody at the top making decisions, and the others usually have to follow. Right? And one person or a very, very small group of people making decisions. Now, the downside to this is very obvious, right? That person or group could be either just plain stupid and make the wrong decisions, or they could be very egoic and make decisions in their own interest mostly. But the upside, sorry, is that you can make decisions fast. You can move very quickly in a structure like that. So you would never get on a plane that is democratically ruled, right? Because you can be pretty sure that that plane will drop out of the sky, because um, if you have long conversations in critical situations about what to do, then you just don't have the time to do that on an airplane, right? So you need to be absolutely clear who's in charge and who's making decisions, right? And just follow those decisions, because you might not see the whole picture. Even if you disagree with the decision, you might not see the whole picture, and then if you don't act accordingly, you will screw the whole situation up. Possible. So you have to really, really trust your leader in that case, the pilot on the plane. So there's downsides and there's upsides to the hierarchical condition. So let's look at the extreme opposite, the consensus group. Now, in a consensus group, people get together and have to reach consensus. Right? They sit and talk until they reach consensus. That can take a long, long time. But once they reach consensus, everybody's really on board and they really understand what's going on, and they can act with more precision because everybody knows. Right? This is kind of like a little bit what we're doing here with these sessions to get into consensus about an entire worldview so that we can make decisions individually that are aligned with the whole. That's very close to consensus, not really, but somewhere in between, right? So upside is everybody's fully on board, everybody's fully understood it. Downside is it takes a long time and it can be very, very frustrating. So then we have democracy. And in a democracy, the population, the people, vote on stuff in the most general way. Right? Now the upside is that everybody gets to participate in the decision making somehow. The downside is that you delegate decision making, real decision making, in usually very low intervals, long intervals, right? So 4 years, 5 years, until you can signal that you want something again. And you have little control over what's going on in between. Right? So upside is you can take part, but your taking part is very limited in its power. and it's even limited in the power of everybody. So if the whole population comes together, um, five every 5 years, then that's very limited in power, right? So because all of the other decisions are made in between by a very, very small group. It's kind of like a mix between consensus and hierarchy, but it can have a very, very interesting and important function. That is to make a decision based on a majority. If you just want to know how do the people feel about this specific thing, you can ask and you can find out, right? Without big consensus, but without making a decision by a small group. So before I go on, one more thing about democracy. We tend to think about democracy in terms of vote and parties that get voted for, represented by some individuals every couple of years. The original form of democracy, the myth that we tell ourselves about where democracy comes from, which is ancient Athens, was not like that at all. In ancient Athens, you were actually chosen randomly to be part of one of a number of bodies of government that were mutually controlling. And it was your responsibility as a citizen, in that case, white male Athenian citizen, but a citizen, so we can extend that to every human, um, it was your responsibility to take part in this. And that has enormous benefits because as it is easy to see who is going to be elected or influence an election so that somebody is going to be elected in a current configuration of democracy, and then make sure that you own that person so that the decision making after the election is in your favor. That is very easy in the current setup of democracy, and we just have to look to the USA to see the results of that. In a sortition-based, meaning randomly chosen based system, you don't know who's going to be in charge next. And you better behave because you're just one of the people, right? Your neighbor could be in charge next time. And if you don't take your neighbor also into account, well, you might not be taken into account in the next round. Okay, so it has much more mutuality. So there's a guy, Forrest Landry. He came up with a very, very brilliant form of organization using those multiple forms of governance in one coherent structure. He calls that the small group process. And it works maybe up to 25 people. Right? It's limited in its scope because at the center he puts a consensus group. There is a group making coherent decisions in consensus about what needs to be done. But that group is not operational. So that group doesn't go out and plow the field. It just decides that somebody needs to plow the field. And what it then does, it creates task forces that are hierarchically structured, that go out and do the operations, that do the thing on the ground. Because they have to make decisions on the spot. They have to be quick, they have to be effective. That's why it's better to be a hierarchically organized task force that can do this. whatever, plowing the field, going shopping, building a house, going hunting, um, building a kindergarten, whatever, right? That's task force jobs. The decision behind that comes from the consensus group. Now, there might be an issue, right? So one of the task forces might decide that they want to be in absolute power because they have a psychopathic leader. And somebody sees that and somebody says, okay, that's a bad idea. We need to discuss it. We need to get rid of this guy. Or somebody thinks the consensus group came up with a totally ridiculous idea. So you want to be able to highlight that. That's where the democratic function comes in the form of a emergency button. So anybody can push that emergency button and say, there's an issue. There's an issue. This is the issue that I see. Do we all see that? Or does the majority of us see that? And if the majority sees that, then it needs to be addressed by the consensus group. Okay, so you add a democratic process of a majority to the mix so that you still have balance of power. Okay. Now, as I said, that works in small groups. But if we now add sortition to the mix, we could say we choose one or a number of consensus groups randomly from a larger population that have to reach consensus on certain topics and then send out task forces. Then you can apply that to a bigger group. Now that's theory. I haven't tested that. Forrest has tested the small group process. And from experience, I know that I've done similar things that get close to that. So I'm absolutely convinced that that's a good model. So that's one way of organizing a group. It's very close to another form of governance, which is holacracy. Holacracy is the idea that you, instead of defining levels of hierarchy and responsibilities that build on top of one another, you create a web of responsibilities. And you can have multiple responsibilities from multiple perspectives. You can lead one aspect of the whole, but you can be led by somebody else in another aspect. So roles can switch. Right? I can be the boss in one aspect, and you can be the boss in the other aspect. Right? So that also creates desired outcomes because you tend to act more, I mean, in mutual interest if you also are under the other person in some other context. So you define circles in that system. So circles can be targeted at any kind of purpose. Let's say there's a marketing, there's a circle, there's a plow the field circle, there's a run the kindergarten circle, etc. And each circle has two leaders. One leader is an outward bound leader, so represents the circle in the entire system. And the other one is the leader for the inside, organizing all the matters of the how. How do we do this? How do we actually manage our purpose of the circle? And circles can be created or ended by the group of the outside bound circle leaders. Okay, so that's roughly what how holacracy works. And finally, I want to look at one that's also very similar. So I see some similarity between all three. That comes from Unisys Bank, the Grameen Bank. In Grameen, you receive a loan, small loan, gender independent, but usually it's women for some reason. So I'm going to refer to mostly women here. And you have to be in part of a group of 8 who, if you want to receive a loan, right? So you want to receive a loan, you have to find 7 others who also want to receive a loan. So each of you receives a loan, but you don't receive the loan together. You're not responsible for the others' loans. You're just a group that comes together to reflect on your situation and to support each other once a week. And once a month, 5 of these groups come together for a bigger sense making. Okay? Bigger group of, okay, what's going on here? How do your groups work? Do you have issues? Can we help each other, etc.? Now, Grameen shows the highest loan return rate of any bank in the world. Right? Probably because they have such a system in place where mutual social control and support is part of the system. Absolutely brilliant type of governance system. So this mutuality is a crucial element. So that's, I think, the red thread that you need to have mutual dependencies. If you speak with Tyson Juncker-Porter, for example, who's from Australia, about how you structure a community, he basically says, well, by affinity, smaller groups of people will be drawn to do certain things. So some will care for the water, some will go hunting, some will build huts, whatever, but they're all mutually dependent, right? So each of them has a power function, but without the others, they will be lost. Right? So this mutuality as a core function of the governance system is something to look out for if you want to have something that's actually stable and doesn't upregulate psychopaths. Right? Because in our current mode of governance in companies and governments, we upregulate psychopaths. Right? We have like 2% psycho or sociopaths in basically any population. But if you look at the leadership, 10 to 20% of them have at least psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies. That's an issue. Right? So we need to be very, very careful with that. Yeah, I think that's it. Let's open it.
Thank you. I have a question. Where is this number coming from that 10 to 20% of the current global leadership are sociopaths, psychopaths? That's a lot.
Yeah, I don't have a specific study at hand, but that's a number I keep reading everywhere.
Yeah. Okay.
So I'm pretty sure it's get some proper also citable study on that. That's not more than 2-3 Google searches away.
Okay, interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Catherine, you want to share something?
Actually, no. I love the idea of governance, especially the consensus group.
Mhm.
Think I love that. That is what we are doing here. You know.
Yep.
We agree, we sit together, we decide solutions together instead of having that one party that decides everything. I think the consensus group making the coherent decisions together is much better. I think that is the only thing that I can yeah.
And to be totally candid, I mean, we're moving into consensus, right? Coming from something that's more towards the hierarchy, where Sebastian and I push this, right? Not in an egoic sense, but we push it to a situation where we all push it, right? That's what we actually want. But you're totally right. That's what we're striving for. Yes. That's why Sebastian and I try to hold ourselves back as much as possible.
Nice.
At the same time, we need you, so and you need us.
That's
yeah.
Just as much as you need us, we need you, right? So that's mutual, and this mutuality is what we want to establish as the core culture of in Motherland. Because if we manage to do that in all aspects of what we do here, and we cannot fail. We just simply cannot fail, right? But we have to be non-egoic when we do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it also reminds me among the 7 questions that came up in our first session about governance, how we come up with it, how it's enforced, and how it's authorized. Yeah. So I think looking at governance again is, yeah.
Cool. Yeah. How is it authorized, right? So how is it enforced? That becomes a very interesting question too, right? How do we enforce decisions? Not us in general, but specifically, but in general, in such a setup, the more you come from consensus, the less you have to enforce. Right? The more centralized you are, the more you have to enforce. But the more consensus and distributed you are, the slower the system. Right? So you need to have a balance between those two. And my tendency to deal with that is, if I see that I have to enforce something, then something's wrong with the system. Then I have to think about the system itself and not about that specific action. Because that means that the entire system is set up in a way that it allows that thing to happen, that I want to enforce. And so I have to think about what's wrong with the system, so that the system itself doesn't allow that to happen. And usually that's answered by mutuality. Trust and mutuality.
I mean that's a highly reflective approach. Definitely. And also if it doesn't allow any egoic kind of attitude or behavior. Interesting, very interesting. I think generally what I'm saying for many, many years, I don't know, Catherine, if you have heard about it. Are you familiar with plant medicine? Have you ever heard of Iboga, for example, from Gabon? Iboga.
No.
It's a very strong ritual for young adults. They go on a very deep spiritual journey, and it's initiated by a plant medicine, and it's a very it's a very massive existential experience. So, and these also conquered, let's say, other areas of the world, and people going on this deep inner journeys guided by different plants. So one is very popular, it's Iboga. It comes from Gabon, and others come from South America. The thing is, what happens if you take this kind of medicine, you just really, you get so humble, and you suddenly become very connected to everything on this planet. And what I'm saying for many years, like, it should be mandatory for every politician on this planet to really go on a plant ceremony. And I'm serious about that. And not just for one, just actually for 2-3 months, every single weekend, or even longer, you know. You have this total cleanse, you know. After this, you really experience a very deep ego death, and you suddenly care for yourself and for your environment. And I think that's something many politicians on this planet are lacking, because they're a system of power and hierarchy, you know, and they're also very egoic. So this is one thing, and generally this deep sense of empathy and belonging is something we lack on a global scale. Yeah.
I want to say 2 or 3 things if once you're done.
Yeah, you know, that's something, I mean, I'm sharing with everybody I know. I think this could be one tool to help getting people more grounded again and in touch with themselves and their communities and their nations and the planet.
There's one thing that I care a lot about, which is size word definitions. And you just used one word that commonly is used imprecisely, and that's empathy. Because we equate empathy with compassion in the way we use it, but empathy, you cannot be an effective psychopath without having empathy. Right? So there's a dark and a light side to empathy. The light side I would call compassion. The dark side, I don't know. I don't have a word for that, but let's try and use compassion if we mean the light side of empathy. Because empathy basically just says, I can imagine how somebody feels, but then it doesn't say what I do with that. If I do something beautiful, then it's compassion. If I do something nasty, then it's manipulation, exploitation, things like that. This just my sorry. This just
it's great. Thank you.
The nerd in me. That's
great. Thank you for reflecting on this. Yeah.
And then the other thing, there's, if you look at these, also ayahuasca, I don't know about Iboga, what the active ingredients is, but in many of these rituals, the active ingredients is DMT. Specifically one type of that molecule, 5-MeO-DMT, which is the closest, apparently, I don't know that, but apparently the closest that you can get to a near-death experience without actually being close to death. And it seems that the type of how to say that, chaos it creates in the brain is conducive to seeing things in a more holistic way. So the if you want to associate something physiologically with the system 1, system 2 thing, right? System 1 being the intuitive, heuristics driven, fast kind of thinking, then it's probably the right side of the brain, which is the part of the brain that sees the entire picture, right? And has to have strategies to pick whatever is relevant from the entire picture. Whereas the left side of the brain, no, sorry, the left side of the brain is the more structuring, more sense making, more planning part of the brain. Right? And if you are in a, for example, you probably know all of that much better than I do, Catherine, but if you are in a schizophrenic mode, then your right side is downregulated, and you're trying to explain yourself and everything else that happens in the world by the limited function of the left side of your brain. Now, DMT activates that whole thing, right? So you do have much more integration between those two, and this could be lasting, right? This can have lasting effects, and you don't have to use substance to get there, because basically every living thing on this planet produces DMT. And you can increase your own DMT production by certain breathing techniques. I sometimes use that. I call it inside popcorn. So I prime my brain with a bunch of things that I just cannot solve. It's some really hard nuts to crack. I write them down, maybe think about them a little bit, and then I lie down and do breathing exercises for an hour. And after about 20-30 minutes, it goes like popcorn. The idea is just start popping. It's absolutely crazy. So yeah, that's is definitely powerful. So I totally agree.
Yeah.
Mhm. So maybe I can reflect on what Diana has said. I think Ibuga can really be helpful, especially politicians, the way you're saying.
Yeah.
I just I love the idea of that. And in our last discussion, I think it was our last discussion, the other one where we said that the state of humanity begins with an individual. And you brought about the aspect of empathy, and empathy is a very powerful tool. And when you don't have empathy, you cannot be a good leader. And me, in a psychological profession, when you don't have empathy, you can't even be a psychologist in the first place. That is the most powerful tool, because you need to feel the need of people. You need to put yourself in someone's shoe and feel that depression and feel that condition, so that you can be able to help them. And you find that is why there are a lot of cases of corruption. I won't say in Kenya only, but I'll say mostly in Africa. I was reading some article, I think about a month ago, where there's some Chinese politician who is sentenced to death for corruption of millions of money. And when you look at, for example, at ours, you find that they squander money. Money is given out to help to feed children, to educate children, to empower women, and someone just squanders it, billions and billions of Kenya shillings. And these are the same people that we still have leading us. We still even vote for, and they don't have that empathy. They can't feel, the needs of their fellows. They can't feel the needs of the other Kenyans. And I will keep on giving. I think I'm going to keep on giving this example of the state of how now we don't have starvation. And some politicians even take advantage of that. Someone will take advantage of some project of, I saw USAID. USAID is here, and they were giving out some food in the coastal region, Kilifi. It's called Kilifi County. And you'll find someone or a governor for that region even taking advantage. So it is really, really, really a big menace. So empathy is a very powerful tool, and without that, yeah.
I'm really fascinated by the let's call it a Grameen method or approach. I wonder if this got ever adopted to any kind of other settings, not only in the financial ecosystem, so giving a loan to people, but also I'm just, I'm thinking how we could potentially take some of this, in terms of engaging the farmer mid and very long term, if there is something in it which we could use to collaborate with the farmers, and they're also amongst each other. So just thinking out loud, I think it's a very
Absolutely
amazing,
sure. I'm absolutely sure.
very powerful approach.
There's, I want to say two things. One is another example of something similar. The other one is about leading. I'm going to start with the leading thing because that ties into what you were saying, Catherine. There are different. I'm not religious, and I'm specifically not Catholic, but there's an interesting story in the Bible about Moses. So everybody talks about Moses leading the people through the Red Sea, right? But it wasn't Moses alone. It was a team of leaders. It was his sister, it was his brother. He was walking in the front. He was the face of it. But his sister was making sure nobody was left behind. And his brother was on the sides, making sure nobody would drop off the sides or be attacked or something, right? So leadership has to be a group effort, right? And there are different positions. Right? If you're the leader in the front, you get the fame, but you also get shot, right? You're the front. So that can be dangerous, but that benefit is if you want fame, you get fame. Okay. And every of all of these positions are different. So I think that's also something important to take in mind. The leadership is a group thing. And just because you're not the person standing on the stage or in the front, that doesn't mean you're less of a leader, right? I think that's super important to acknowledge. So the other thing is from a book called Reinventing Organizations by Frederic Laloux. He looked at different forms of running organizations that could be very helpful for our context. And one of them is called Buurtzorg, which comes from the Netherlands. And it's Buurtzorg decided to reorganize the way home care for elderly or sick people was managed. It used to be very centralized, and the working conditions were very poor. The actual care was very poor because of that. So you could you would be charged in like seconds you took somebody to clean. So 7.5 minutes in the bathtub, 12 euros, whatever, right? I'm just picking this up, but something like that. What Buurtzorg did was to give a group of nurses an office and a neighborhood and say, you decide how you organize yourself. And everybody said, well, it's totally going to fail. There's no way they can do that. But what they found was, of course they could organize themselves. I mean, they're grown-ups. Well, of course they can. And secondly, what they did was they spent more time with the patients. They were actually listening to them. And by listening to them, they helped them feel better, and helping them feel better made them less sick. So although they spent more time in one session, in total, they needed to spend less time because people were happier. And everybody was better off. Now, I think by now, Buurtzorg is the absolute leading organization doing this in the Netherlands with last time I checked, a couple of years ago, 12,000 nurses, which was already, I think, the majority of nurses in the Netherlands to do this. And they do this with a super tiny headquarter compared to the size. I think they're about 25 or 50 people or something like that, right? So I can totally see something like this for Motherland, where the people on the ground make their own decisions. Why not? I mean, they're the best to make those decisions. And the people in the center, they help them get to the resources and solve issues they cannot solve where they are. That's the purpose of that, not to control them, to serve them.
It's amazing. I love it. I mean, it sounds so logical, and it just a minority of groups are doing this on this planet. It's absolutely clear to do it this way and no other way.
And if we don't live it, who would, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's amazing.
We'll stop the recording. Oops.